Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. This is Carly Stevens Books for all things writing, publishing, and indie author life. Let's talk about unreliable narrators. First of all, what is an unreliable narrator? It's a term that you may have heard in English class regarding works like The Turn of the Screw by Henry James or A Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. It is when you have usually a first-person narrator that you can't necessarily trust to be telling you the truth about a situation. Now, that might be because the person is losing their sanity. It might be because they're intentionally lying to you for some reason. Or in rare cases, it can be because the mental capacity of the narrator is not high enough to truly comprehend what's happening. And so we, the reader, need to read between the lines and figure out what is actually happening and where we're kind of being duped, misled, or kind of confused by the narrator. So I'm sure that there is probably a way to have an unreliable narrator who is a third-person narrator, but if there is, I haven't seen it. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be talking about first-person narrators who cannot be trusted. So why would you as a writer want to have the reader not trust what's being told to them? This is obviously not a narration style that's going to fit every type of story. For most, in fact, most kinds of stories, you want the reader to trust that what they're being told is actually the case. That is what's happening. We can believe, even if the narrator is perhaps misguided or they misunderstand something here or there. It's not that they're unreliable on some fundamental level. We need to believe our narrators for the story to even make sense, right? But there are a few genres where having an unreliable narrator can just make the whole thing so much juicier. So I showed you a couple of classic examples here a moment ago. Turn of the Screw by Henry James and Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. Turn of the Screw is a thriller about a woman who takes a governess job, and the ending is so ambiguous that you're not sure if she has gone crazy. It's essentially a ghost story. Or if there actually is a ghost, possession, some of the creepy things that she thinks might be happening. It's hard to tell if it's real or not. In A Telltale Heart, the very beginning of the story kicks off with the narrator protesting, "Why would you think I'm mad? Why would you think that? I can hear so well. I can hear things in heaven and on earth." And immediately you go, "No, you are. You're mad. We can't trust anything that you say at face value. We can't take it that way." So for a work that is horror, for a work that is kind of a horror thriller, for even just thrillers or mysteries in general, having an unreliable narrator can add a layer of confusion and doubt and even fear that can contribute to the effect of your overall piece. So how do you write an unreliable narrator? My suggestion is that at the beginning of the work, there should be some hint that the narrator cannot necessarily be trusted. So put up some red flags so the reader knows to start reading between the lines a little bit. You don't have to do that. You can slowly over time make the character more unreliable, etc. Like in my gothic horror short story, To Have Had So Much Blood, the narrator does turn out to be unreliable, but you don't get too many hints of that until halfway through. Now, it is a short story, of course, so if I was writing something that was a full-length horror story, I don't think I would wait till halfway through to indicate that maybe the main character cannot be trusted and has some really dark stuff that he's suppressing in his past, and it's maybe affecting the way he's perceiving the world now. What people will often do is they'll indicate at the beginning by having some kind of disclaimer that the character says, or in the case of Turn of the Screw by Henry James, you have a kind of scene from after the events of the story that kicks everything off and says, do we really know what happened? And just immediately plants that question in the mind of the reader before the story officially begins. So that's one method that you can go with. Even though this is, of course, an older book, you can use a similar kind of framing device. In fact, a lot of thrillers will do that. They'll have some kind of aftermath scene, if you will, at the very beginning to make us think, oh, wait a second, so what happened and how did we get here and who can we trust to tell us the truth about that situation? Another way that you can establish that you have an unreliable narrator, and people do need to be looking between the lines, is by having the character protest how much you should trust them. That is usually an indication that perhaps they cannot be trusted to the degree that they're asking you. So in a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's work, this kind of thing is used. Please trust me, I'm not insane. Another way that you can raise some red flags for the reader is just to have a diary format. That format inherently lends itself to some questions of credibility. There are certain things you can do to make that diary format feel more credible, build the credibility of your character, but there's more room for that unreliability when you get such a narrow account from your point of view character. My favorite example of this, and possibly my favorite unreliable narrator of all time, is the one from Charlotte Perkins Gilman's story, The Yellow Wallpaper. In The Yellow Wallpaper, there's a woman who travels with her husband and newborn child and some servants, some staff, to a manor house. At first she thinks that it's very romantic and nice. They're going there ostensibly for her health. We can tell throughout the story very early on that her actual condition is being laughed off and dismissed by her husband, by doctors, by basically all of the men that are around her that are considered more of the experts than she is about her own condition. So she's making the most of this situation. She says, I have to rest. My husband doesn't like it when I write anything. And you get these little red flags like, okay, something is off about this situation. And it's when we get just a couple pages into this story and she begins describing the room where they're having her specifically stay, that has bars on the window, that has peeling yellow wallpaper, that has a bed that is bolted to the ground, that has rings in the walls, that makes you go, hang on a second, this isn't just a bedroom. In fact, it's not a children's nursery as she was once told that it was. She's interpreting all of these very suspicious elements of the space as being precautions for children, but how bizarre. Like right away we get all of these red flags just in what's happening and the way she's interpreting it that should make us go, something's off about her. And it's true, as the diary progresses, we see that she is incredibly mentally ill and only getting worse and worse at a rapid rate. It's haunting. It's a fantastic horror story. It's one of the earliest horror stories that I actually enjoyed, because it was not a genre that I loved early on. But yeah, so those are a few ways that you can establish an unreliable narrator as your point of view character to add to that creepy factor, to add to the doubt and confusion of your story. So again, not every kind of story is going to benefit from this kind of narrator, but it is such a cool device to use if you write in the horror or thriller genre. There are a couple other types of stories that could benefit from this, but I think those are the main two. Again, most stories you want your point of view character to be at least mostly reliable. You know, we believe that what they're saying is happening is actually happening. For unreliable narrators, it's the reader that is the sifter of the truth, what is actually going on. We are the ones who are treating this story like its own mystery, where we're picking up clues and you know, tying the pieces together and figuring out where the truth actually lies. So if that sounds interesting to you, then try it out. Try writing an unreliable narrator and see how that affects your work. All right, that is it for today. I'll be back next week with a brand new video, but make sure to follow this, subscribe to this channel if you are new, like this video if you like it, and head over to my website, carly-stevens.com, if you want more writing resources. All right, until later, bye.